I want to start out first by acknowledging the co-authors, Laura Higgins and then Sam Haynes, who's here with us today. I also want to acknowledge TxDOT because this work was funded by TxDOT. And in particular, I want to thank DJ. He's sort of a rock star in the motorcycle world, gives me lots of great information, and really pushes this stuff along like he should. As a researcher, I'm always interested in the very first thing is what's the problem? And we've talked about the problem in different terms today. Melissa talked a little bit about it, Ken talked about it, but it all boils down to the simple fact that motorcyclists are overrepresented in fatalities and crashes. And not by just a little bit, it's by a lot. Okay, we're not talking just a few percent, it's on the order of, Ken, do you know the number? It's 14% overrepresentation or so for fatalities, I think.
On motorcycles?
Yeah, compared to motor vehicles, it's huge. 16%. That's not a small percentage. And we find, unfortunately, that Texas is, numbers-wise, when we look at sheer numbers, not the rate, we're toward the bottom. Only Florida, stay away Florida, we are behind Florida and California, okay? We're one of the worst states in the United States for motorcycle safety relative to fatalities right now. About half the people don't wear gear at all, which is stunning to me because I look at this guy and I see, well, he's going to have kind of a bad day, right? He's screwing around, his buddies are back here, right? They probably taunted him into trying to do a stoppie. That's where the bike comes to you see this on the intersections, bike comes to a sudden stop, the back wheel goes up and drops it down again. It looks like a lot of fun to them. It doesn't look like any fun to me as a rider, but he's probably going to have a bad day. It looks like actually here the fork on the front is shattered, and he's probably going to walk away with a few scrapes. I'm not so concerned about this guy. Okay, he's purposely putting himself in harm's way. This is what I'm concerned about. The bike is still moving, and I just look at this woman's elbow. You feel your own elbow, and you're just like, there is no meat underneath that skin. It goes right to bone. This woman, I don't know what ever happened to her, but you know that her hand is scraped up, her elbow, her hips, her other hand is on the ground here. This is the type of stuff that I'm interested in addressing. Getting people to wear enough gear to where they don't end up getting up right away, right? Like the other guy, he probably got up pretty quick. She didn't get up very quickly. Her significant other, whoever else is on the bike, is wearing a full helmet, or I guess it's not including the chin gear. She's just wearing a half helmet, okay? Which is a good start, but we can tell from this crash that the head is not going to take the brunt of the injury. It's their body. This is what I'm interested in addressing. So as we continue with the problem identification part, there has been a little bit of research out there on gear use. Ann McCard at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and then Patty Turner, who used to be at TTI, has done a little bit of work on this. But for the most part, a lot of these questionnaires just include one little question on motorcycle gear use, or maybe 2 or 3 questions over here on gear use. Okay, and most times they really focus on helmet use. They don't focus a whole lot on pants and jackets and gloves and everything else that would really make riding significantly more safe. But what they find, at least with helmet use, a lot relates, when they decide not to wear a helmet, relates to personal freedom. Sometimes they actually think that there are no protective benefits to the helmet. I happen to think that that result is mainly due to the fact that some people think that it obscures vision, it attenuates your hearing, you don't get the safety benefits that you think you should, and those disbenefits outweigh the overall benefit of the helmet. That's my perception of this finding. There is a little bit of work looking at the likelihood to wear gear, and you can see the percentages here. We have pretty good compliance on boots and gloves, but when you get down to jacket and pants and some of the other things, basically nobody wears that stuff, or very few people wear that stuff. So of all the riders in here, who regularly wears pants? Good padded pants, a significant portion. Who doesn't wear, like jeans don't count. Who doesn't wear good padded pants? And I throw myself in this category, right? That's one of the things that we notice throughout a lot of this work is people don't wear a lot of that basic safety gear that they could, stuff that's pretty easy. So what I'm interested in, like I said in the previous slide, I'm really interested in finding ways that we can increase riders' use of motorcycle gear, okay? And I think there's this, based on the surveys that are out there, there's very little information letting us know exactly why riders wear gear and why they don't wear gear. And I'm not talking about just helmets. I'm talking about helmets and everything else, like the woman in the slide. Her helmet really is going to be a benefit there, but she really needed the rest of that gear to stay safe. So what I want to do is share the results of a survey that we've been doing, and this is actually one small deliverable within a larger project. The first step, the survey, was to better understand what are the underlying reasons for motorcycle rider gear use and non-use. We want to take that information then and use it to build an outreach campaign that specifically addresses those primary issues. So we're not just going to go out and develop an education campaign based on what we think is important for riders. We're actually going to find out what are the underlying motivational factors for gear use and then build that campaign off of that. And I think that's an important consideration. The results, I'm really interested. We did some demographic questions, riding history and habit, but then we have a whole section on gear use, riding, reasons for wearing the gear, what gear they do choose, and where they get their messages from. And I'm going to focus on some of these today, but the actual survey is much longer. So today is really just kind of a teaser. Ultimately, I assume that the results of the report will be released, and then you can access it there. We'll give you a nice long number as well, like Ken did to write down. The objective here initially was to look at riders in three different groups. We have what we think are three distinct groups. We have the riders who basically say they're never going to wear gear. Right? And there are people out there, there are people that wear all the gear all the time. That's sort of that message, right? They have the coat, the jacket, it's padded, they've got the pants, that's padded, they have the boots, the gloves, the helmet. Within the helmet, they oftentimes have eye protection and ear protection. They basically wear everything. And then you get the group in the middle, which admittedly is many of us in here. Initially, I wanted to do a survey looking at the behaviors of all three different groups. And then it dawned on me, it's important to understand what these people think, but I'm never going to change their behaviors. They are so entrenched in not wearing gear, I'm probably not going to have much luck in getting them to wear anything. These people, I really want to understand why they wear gear, but the outreach program is not aimed to them, right? It's not a good use of resources to try and tell people to wear more gear when they're already wearing everything. So my main goal is to really understand what's going on with this middle group. How do we get those people to shift further down this continuum to the left to wear more gear or all the gear? Okay. So our survey, we sampled, I think it was about 270 some total riders with some missing surveys, things that were incomplete, or maybe some people didn't take it very seriously. We end up with a sample just over 200. We collected the sample information, survey information from motorcycle events, dealers, shops. We found people on the street who rode bikes. We weren't that very picky about who we got as long as they rode a motorcycle and they had some motorcycle riding experience. Men, women, people of all ages, it really didn't matter as long as they rode that bike. As with every survey, there are some limitations, and I'll try and touch on these as we move through the survey results. First and foremost is 200 is about the minimum sample you want. So we did this, what's called a power analysis ahead of time. It tells us how many samples we need to be statistically significant or reasonably satisfied statistically. And it comes to be about 200, so we're at the minimum. The other limitation that's associated with that sample size is that, say, if we go out and we select a bunch of people at, say, Harley-Davidson dealerships, a lot of the results may reflect the findings from that particular group of people. So as we go through this today, keep this in mind. We are addressing this. We have an online survey version that we have sent out. Yes?
To coalition members.
To start at coalition members.
If you're here and you ride and you didn't receive it because you're not in the coalition, I would love to send it to you, so please find me at some point.
Yeah. So that survey, that online survey, will go out to a much wider audience in Texas, and hopefully you'll get many, many more responses, and it will begin to add to the statistical validity of the results. So first, just a quick note about demographics. We ended up with roughly 80% men, the remainder of them women, which is a little different from the general, from the fatality statistics, but this may be more close to what the riding population is. Marital status, nothing surprising. Education, 1% or less. 1% of the sample had less than a high school diploma. 14% with a high school, some college, advanced degree, bachelor of science, and graduate degree. This is probably skewed a little bit higher than the population in Texas, but that's probably because we sampled heavily at motorcycle dealerships and places where these people tended to come more often. So, age, as you can see, the age breakout on top, these are the number of surveys returned. This number is a little higher because well, for a variety of reasons. But you can see we had a fairly decent distribution across the ages, a little overrepresented in the younger age group, but we controlled for that in the results. The one thing I want to point out is we asked people, one of the very first questions in the questionnaire was, are you an all the gear all the time person, or are you some of the gear or none of the gear? One person responded that they were none of the gear, none of the time. Okay. We get roughly a halfway split between all the gear all the time and some of the gear some of the time. Okay? These results, I can hardly see them because I don't have my glasses and I can't hardly see them here. So we look at helmet use, gloves, boots, and this is percentage of respondents who indicated that they use this gear 100% of the time. And we're going to focus on the blue lines first. These are the people that initially answered some of the gear some of the time. So of all the respondents who answered, they said, yes, I wear helmets. Of all the respondents who said they wear some of the gear some of the time, 70% of those respondents said they always wore helmets. So 30% said they don't wear helmets, okay, in that case. And you can see in general, we find helmets, gloves, boots are pretty well worn, and then eye protection and is another big one. But we don't see a lot of use for jackets, pants, and certainly not armored vests for this particular group. What is interesting is the lines that we have here, the gray lines I guess they are, these are people who initially said they were all the gear all the time. But when you dig further and you say, well, how many people actually wear their helmets all the time? You find it's like about 98%. But then you see things like here, jacket with impact protectors, 82% or so. 82% of the respondents said they always wear a jacket or pants. And these, which means the other 18% who earlier said they were all the gear all the time, they said, I don't wear that gear. So we've got this big disconnect between the people who actually say they wear all the gear all the time and what they actually do, okay? We look at reasons for wearing helmets. Well, we had a series of questions. They basically see this list, and then we say rank order that list. We want you to rank order 1, 2, and 3, and then we just aggregate all the number 1 answers, which is the number 1 column, all the number 2 answers, and then all the number 3. And I'm mainly interested in number 1 and number 2 rank orderings. So people wear helmets for the protective benefits. No mystery here. Secondarily, their second ranking is roughly split between they wear helmets because of the weather, rain in Minnesota where I'm from, sleet, snow, ice, other things like that. And then habit is another reason, a high-ranking reason for wearing a helmet. Reasons for not wearing a helmet, almost the opposite. They don't wear a helmet because of the weather, right? It's just too darn hot here in Texas, they think, that to wear that helmet, too much heat. It feels better to ride without it. And I've only ridden a few times in my life without a helmet, mainly around the neighborhood and stuff. And it does feel good to have the wind going through my receding hairline. It's wonderful. It's really kind of a midlife enjoyable moment for me. But this is what they're getting at, is that there's that personal freedom, there's that sense, there's that wind, there's that exposure even that goes without having a helmet. And then they didn't think it wasn't very important on some rides, and this mainly related to shorter rides, grocery stores, to work and back if it's close and stuff like that. So, reasons for not wearing a helmet. When we look at gear use, which is really, again, helmets are important, but we're also interested in gear use. What do people do with the rest? Their rank ordering, protective benefits, again, not very surprising, very consistent with the helmet. They wear it because of weather, and in Minnesota, I still have them, I don't know why here in Texas, but I have winter riding gloves. They look like snowmobile gloves, but they're for motorcycling. They're absolutely wonderful. If you ever have them, if you ever have a chance to ride in Minnesota, get them. And then habit is the other reason. Reasons for not wearing other gear. Weather across the board is one of the most significant reasons. But I'm surprised that people say they don't wear gear because of hot weather here in Texas. But in fact, there are certain types of gear you can wear in hot weather that actually make it more comfortable. So you don't get sunburned, so you don't get dehydrated so fast, so you avoid heat stroke and things like that. And I think some of the people are missing the fact that certain types of gear can address hot weather conditions. Incentives to wear a helmet. Again, it's another rank order question. We ask them to rank order their choices here, 1 through 3, and then we just aggregate them. The number one answer, I don't have my glasses, friends or family. Basically, this is peer influence. And that's a high ranking, ranked number 1, and it's also a high ranked number 3 item. Information about the odds of surviving a crash was ranked number 2. And I find that fairly interesting. And I don't, when we go to develop our outreach and education campaign, this is pretty easy to understand. It's like, well, yeah, we can talk to spouses and have them put some influence on their partners. We can talk to riders to have them put influence on their colleagues. But when it comes to talking about the odds of surviving a crash, I'm in transportation safety research, and somebody tells me you've got a 12 times risk of being into a crash. Even I don't really kind of practically understand, like 12 times. Does that mean if I go out 100 days, 12 times? It's still. So trying to convert this into a safety campaign is a little challenging. It also assumes, or at least it suggests to me, that we're going to go to these people and we're going to say, well, you've got a 4 times higher chance of getting injuries because you're not wearing this gear. And I wonder if the riders often want to say, well, 4 times, that's not nearly as bad as 10 times. So if I don't wear my pants, it's only a 4 times increase. So hey, I'm going to take that chance. I'm going to roll the dice today. I don't know that that's the kind of message that we want to send to motorcyclists, to say, we're going to give you some information that you can use and support your decision to not wear gear and change your mind like that. So as we go forward with our education campaign, we're trying to address this particular issue, but it has been challenging. Incentives to wear other gear, again, the 3rd highest ranked factor, family or friend, peer pressure, information about surviving the odds of a crash, and then information about what types of injuries will be prevented or will be reduced. Again, these 2 messages suffer from the same challenge, right? Again, how do we get this information across in a way that people just don't start to say, well, today I'm feeling pretty good, and I know there's only a 5% increase in injury risk if I don't wear pants or I don't wear a jacket, so I'm going to take that risk today. We really want to move as many people toward the left-hand side of that continuum as we possibly can. Gear selection. So we asked participants to indicate for each one of these items, very important, it's an important issue, somewhat important, somewhat not important, and then not important at all. So we have this Likert scale from one extreme to the other. The answers that you see here are only scores for people who responded very likely. So you can see essentially what happens is fit, comfort, ventilation, cold protection, heat protection. Those all relate to sort of fit, function, and comfort for gear use. And that's basically one main factor. The other main factor is abrasion protection and impact protection, which isn't surprising given the other results that we saw. What I find interesting is not necessarily all this. It's like, yeah, this is great. People are selecting gear and they think it's important to wear this stuff for comfort and protection, but they rank cost, appearance, and brand as very low items. I used to think that people just didn't wear a lot of gear because they didn't want to spend the money to buy it. But these results begin to suggest the opposite, that as a consideration, cost is really low on the ranking list here. And for our Harley-Davidson friends, I know I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth, but maybe wearing Harley-Davidson gear on a Harley-Davidson bike isn't as important to them as it may seem. Media and messages. Where do riders get most of their information from? This is important because as we begin to develop this education and outreach campaign, ultimately we want to deploy it in areas where riders get the primary sources of information, right? We don't want to stick it in a newspaper if nobody reads a newspaper, or we don't want to stick it in some magazine or journal if nobody reads that. We find that the majority of people get their information from the internet, safety information from the internet, from friends, and from other sources. In our follow-up online survey, we're actually digging into this topic in much greater detail since it's so significant here. It's like, okay, where on the internet? Are they trade magazines on the internet? Are they motorcycle forums that people visit? Are they just advertisements that pop up? What's the main source of this information? And then what about the message made you pay attention to it? Primarily that they agree with the message and it related to their riding style or their type of riding. So as we develop our education and outreach campaign based on these results, we want to make sure that we take this into consideration, again, so that this message can begin to resonate with those particular riders. So a couple takeaway messages. One of the main ones was all the gear all the time is not an entirely clear message to riders. I think they understand in their heads all the gear all the time means lots of gear, but when it actually comes down to it, they don't know what gear that is. And in our survey in some other areas, we glean that riders often think that blue jeans are protective gear. And as we all know in this room, blue jeans last just a little bit longer than your skin when it comes to a slide. So we need to clarify for riders what is all the gear all the time. The reasons why they don't wear gear, helmets and regular gear, they wear it primarily for protection, habit, and to avoid poor weather. And then why they don't wear it, again, weather is a high-ranking element, as well as the feeling of that open ride, and then they don't think it's important on some rides. We are trying to follow up this item with a little bit more work. We know that a significant number of motor vehicle crashes occur within, it's like 5 miles of home or something like that. That's kind of the standard statistics that they throw out there, right? And we're trying to find out if that's the same case for motorcycle crashes. Because when they say it's not important on some rides, it's oftentimes that they're saying it's not important on short rides. Well, if we have information that says, well, how far away from home or their main work do crashes occur, then we can begin to tailor our message to this particular finding. Okay, short rides, wear a helmet, or we'll figure some kind of outreach campaign around that. And what would convince you to wear more gear? Again, odds of surviving a crash tends to resonate pretty strongly with riders. But again, we have this challenge with that, and I'm concerned that drivers are going to make these judgment decisions and say, well, pants only help a little bit, therefore I'm okay if I don't wear them. I really want riders to wear as much gear as they can, as we can possibly get them into. The last important point is that the messages that we're trying to develop, again, we're trying to base the messages off the data that we've collected as part of the surveys. So now that we have a little bit better understanding of what motivates riders to wear gear and not wear gear, wear helmets and not wear helmets, we can begin to incorporate that into the actual message so that it's not just a message somebody in the back room developed and said, well, I think it'd be really nice if we said this. Now we actually have evidence that can point us in the direction of the outreach campaign development.